Saturday afternoon, time to face the ultimate end bosses of the German chess league, the team of Baden-Baden. Against us, they rested some of their top players such as Fabiano Caruana and Maxime Bachir-Lagrave, but they still came with an incredibly strong lineup. For me personally, another world-class opponent, Radoslaw Wojtaszek, who was rated above 2700. All of this after losing this 6-hour roller coaster game against Bassem Amin in the morning. I should be tired, but of course, with this level of opposition, you forget that you should be tired. I went for my pet move knight f3 again, and he went for a setup with knight f6 and e6 as he usually does. But now, instead of going for d5, which might transpose to queen's gambit declined or other types of queen's gambit that he plays, he went for the move bishop to b4. So this move was already played against me in this year's Bundesliga season twice. The first time by Nikita Vityugov and the second time by Jan Christian Schröder. And in the latter game, I was actually worse out of the opening already. And so I thought it's quite likely that somebody else is going to try to exploit this weakness of my repertoire again. And in the previous games, I played the move g3, which is fine in itself, but I really didn't want to enter into these lights again because I thought he would be prepared for that. So I played the only line which I prepared a little bit before the tournament, namely the move queen to c2. Queen c2 is very logical. I protect the knight on c3, and now whenever he takes on c3, I want to take back with the queen. So we reach some kind of Nimzo-Indian positions, but where I have not yet played the move d4. Castles, I played a3, now basically forcing him to take on c3, and now I just have a position where I have the pair of bishops. And he is slightly ahead in development, but in general, this position is very, very solid for white, especially in the way which I'm playing it. e6, just e3 now, putting my bishop on e2, protecting the knight on f3, and now I just went for a setup with b4. And in such a setup, I'm slightly ahead in terms of space, and the biggest advantage I have is the pair of bishops. Whereas black's plan is just to basically consolidate the position, but it's very, very difficult for black to play for anything more than equality in this line. So I was very, very happy when I saw this line on the board, because I thought it's not super likely that I'm going to lose a game from such a position with white. Well, I went for castles, and now just d3, protecting against e4. This is still some theoretical line. It's not like really the main line, but it's still some theoretical position. And black can now go for moves like c5, for instance. But my opponent decided differently and played the move h6. So I think he might also have been out of book by now and just played the move h6, which is a logical waiting move, but which now would have allowed me to go for a strong initiative, which I did not see in the game. So the best move that I could have played here is probably the move knight to h4, threatening to go to f5, which would be pretty unpleasant for black, because you can never kick this knight away once you have played the move h6, basically. Because normally you just play g6 to kick it away, but now h6 is hanging, so you would have to spend one more time, and this is really too slow. So after knight h6, knight h4, black faces a little bit of an unpleasant choice, whether to allow knight f5, which is really not what black wants, or to go g6. But in that case, for instance, I could now first go for g3, protecting the knight, and now just for a plan with e4 followed by f4, in which case I would have a pretty strong initiative with white. And I think this position is objectively just at least slightly, if not clearly, better for white. But during the game, I did not really consider knight h4, so maybe it's a sign that I don't understand these structures well enough as of now, but it's definitely something I will take away from the game, that against this h6 move, knight h4 is a strong resource. Instead, I played h3, and he went for a setup with knight to h7. So his idea now is to create some counterplay, to go for knight g5, and maybe later on f5, f4, and try to create some counterplay against my king. And now there is a principled way of playing, which is to go d4. I was not entirely sure how to judge that. So for instance, after knight g5, I could even go d5 and close down this diagonal. And probably also here I'm slightly better. I still have the pair of bishops, I have a little bit more space, but black on the other hand has also some options by coming with f5. So I think against an equally strong opponent I would probably have gone for d4 here. Yet in this particular case I didn't want to enter into too complicated territories. I just went for knight d2, and after queen g5 I just played bishop f3, exchanging the light squared bishop. I give up the pair of bishops, which probably also means that I will not have a big advantage anymore, but at least I remain with this strong bishop on b2, and my position is extremely solid as I don't have any weaknesses whatsoever in the position. Yeah, now I continued to play in a very solid fashion, just going knight d2. On the one hand, the knight might jump later on, so maybe to e4 and then to c3 and then maybe to d5 in an ideal world. But on the other hand, if he goes a5 at some point, I can go knight b3. And finally, if he ever tries to start an attack here with f5, I might have the option of just going f4. But a5, king h1, just a waiting move, maybe preparing f4 as well. Because now, if he gives me f4 without any counterplay for him, basically, then this bishop becomes even stronger, because we are now targeting this pawn on e5. I might even go on with knight to f3 and so on. And with a king on h1, e takes f is never really an option, and so I think that's not what he wants. So therefore he played knight f6. If I go f4 now, he might always have this knight h5 ideas, which looks pretty unpleasant. So instead I now went for knight b3, forcing him to declare what he wants to do on the queen side. And he played the most solid and logical option, takes, and just rook fc8. Yeah, and this is a position which is just a tiny bit better for white, but which is not, which is absolutely solid for black as well. And so it's very, very difficult for me to try to win it against such a strong player. If I want to do something like that, I should probably go for b5. But then he also gets some d5 ideas, and I didn't really want to go in such a strategical battle. Instead, I just played rook fc1 and king g1, just basically waiting for him to declare what he wants to do. And the point here is that black has absolutely no way of creating any complications. Now black is just slightly worse and now finds a good way to reach an equal endgame, but there is no way of in which black could be better here. He played queen d8 with the idea of exchanging rooks on the a file, and as he's the side which has slightly less space, it's usually a good idea to exchange pieces, and that's what he does here. Yeah, again, I could go for something like b5, but I was never sure about d5 in return, so I decided to just exchange the rooks, and after takes, he went for queen a8, now allowing me to also exchange the queens, and I just did that with queen a3, takes. Yeah, now we reach this endgame, which should be completely equal. He now at least had one idea, which was the move e4. And what I don't want is to go to a position with d takes e, because then after knight e4, he has ideas of knight d2, and this pawn on c4 might become a permanent weakness. So that's what I should avoid at all cost. What's also not really working is to take on c5, because now he has this strong intermediate move to go e takes d. And no matter what I do, suppose I take or I go c6, he will just go d2 and next move d1 queen with check, and the game suddenly is decided in his favor. So after e4, I chose the only option there is really, namely to go d4. And his next move surprised me quite a bit. and I think is also objectively not the strongest move. I was expecting, so he played c takes b, and I was expecting c takes d, followed by d5. Now I would have gone c5, then I was expecting b5. So to just shut down the bishop, which now seems a bit stupid, just defending these pawns, but which is also not such a bad piece in the end, because once the bishop is on c3, it will be very difficult for black to capture one of my pawns. A logical line here would go something like knight c2. He could regroup the knight to c6, attacking these two pawns, and I could at the same time regroup my bishop to c3, some position like this. So maybe I could even insert move like knight c6, bishop c3 already here, but it doesn't really matter. So let's say knight c7, and I could go f3 and maybe even g4, and now just capturing the pawn with the king. So that's a line which would just lead again to a pretty equal endgame, where I think the fact that I have a passed pawn on c5 doesn't really matter at all, but I also think he has absolutely no active plan. So that would have also been a position which is around equal. And I thought this would be how the game would conclude, that he would go for d5, and we would reach this position, which should be absolutely equal. I just have to be careful a little bit that I get f3 in and exchange this pawn, that I don't get stuck with the king on the back rank somehow, but I think there's no real danger of that anyhow. So after d4, he played c takes b, which is slightly surprising, and especially in the combination with his next move, which is not d5, which will make some sense, right? But after d5, I have c5, and after bc, dc, it's also clear that if anyone can try to play for more than a draw, it's white. So instead he went for knight e8, and yeah, that shocked me a little bit, that he can be just so easy, just taking and going knight e8. But I didn't really think it through thoroughly, and therefore I missed another chance here to play at least for some advantage. I now played knight b3, which soon after led to a draw. I will show you the rest. But here, I think there are several plans for white which are much better. For instance, one plan could be to go knight c2, followed by knight a3 and knight b5. And he has to be a bit careful how he wants to defend this pawn. So say f5, knight a3, knight b5, king e6 maybe. And yeah, black should be able to hold this, but it's also clear that white is slightly better here. So after d5 check, he can go to e7, but then maybe I can jump knight d4 or so on and have a slight advantage. The other alternative would be to just go g4, prevent f5, and now go for a similar plan, or again go for the plan with f3, e takes f at king f2. And I think he would have had to work a little bit for the draw. I think if I had seen that line, I would probably have gone for it. But yeah, I didn't really think it through so thoroughly, as I was busy calculating knight b3, such that I don't miss any pawn move on his side. And I thought after knight b3, it's just a draw, and that's also what happened in the game. f5, everything got exchanged on c5, and the game was agreed a draw. Well, in this game, I had a very, very solid position from the opening, maybe even a slight advantage. And then I missed a nice chance to go for knight h4. Then the game proceeded in a more or less logical way. I did not always play the most principled continuations, but I also made sure that he doesn't get any unpleasant counterplay. And at the very end, he played this move c takes b4, which was definitely not the strongest move in the position, and which could have allowed me to play for an advantage after g4 or knight c2. But I think still the position would have been objectively within the drawing range. And I also think that he's, of course, a much better player than me, and he probably would have defended that position to a draw anyhow. So overall, quite happy that I didn't allow him any chance of winning the game. And of course, that's for me already an achievement, as my opponent is rated 250 points above me. So thanks a lot for also watching this last round of the Bundesliga tournament, and see you for the next video.
When you have stress, play chess. When you fall on your ass, play chess for a real deal, for Christian Seel.